Nice imitation. But here, we need someone real. The manager said it during lunch break, just as the black girl finished a phone call, spoken entirely in Mandarin. No one laughed. But a few co-workers tilted their heads slightly, as if waiting to see whether she would keep playing that role, or return to Doi. Tiana didn't respond. She didn't explain that her grandmother was Taiwanese. Didn't mention that Mandarin was her third language, after English and French. She simply bowed her head, slipped her phone into her apron pocket, and continued carrying trays. The next day, she was let go. No official reason filed. Just a quiet line from management. Not a fit for our brand atmosphere. 3 days later, a video appeared online. Not posted by Tiana, but by the very guest she'd served that day. A tech billionaire who had sat there. He wasn't just surprised. He called Stanford directly and asked, "Why is your honors student bussing tables at a restaurant no one bothered to vet?" The lunch crowd had just begun to taper when the call came in. It was quiet, tucked beneath the clatter of dishes, the low thrum of jazz in the ceiling speakers, and the occasional burst of laughter from Table 9. Nothing about it should have been remarkable. Just another phone call. Just another waitress answering quietly while restocking lemon slices behind the bar. But then she spoke. Not in English. Not in French. In flawless, flowing Mandarin. "Grandma, I'm fine. How are you feeling today?" The woman on the other end responded with a soft, crackling voice that Tiana Brooks had memorized since she was 7 years old. The voice that once read her bedtime stories with a Taiwanese accent. The voice that called her baby, even when she towered over her at age 14. Tiana's tone was gentle. Intimate. She asked if her grandmother was eating, if the nurse had stopped by, if the medication was still upsetting her stomach. She apologized for not being able to fly back to Taipei this winter. She promised she'd figure something out soon. 32 seconds. That was all it took. 32 seconds of Mandarin on a shift where most people never noticed her except to refill their water. But someone noticed. Behind the espresso machine, the general manager, David Crane, leaned one shoulder against the marble bar and tilted his head, listening. He didn't interrupt. Didn't ask her to stop. He simply watched, arms crossed, with the kind of amused curiosity usually reserved for street performers or wildlife documentaries. When Tiana ended the call and turned around, he was still there. "You know," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you've got the accent down real well." She blinked. "I'm sorry." He pointed vaguely toward the air, like the language was still floating around. "Mandarin, right?" Sounded almost real. Tiana nodded, confused. "It is real. My grandmother." "Yeah," he said, cutting her off. "I get it. Nice touch." She didn't understand. Touch? He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Look, I know the whole cultural edge thing plays well with tips. Makes you seem exotic. Mysterious. But just a heads up, don't overdo it, all right?" She stared at him. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we don't need people performing accents to impress customers. We're an upscale establishment. Authenticity matters." There it was. That word. Authenticity. As if her voice, her background, her bloodline needed validating to be acceptable in the same uniform as everyone else. She said nothing. Not then. Not when he turned and walked away like the conversation had been settled. Not even when her shift ended and no one looked her in the eye on her way out. She just stood there for a moment, still clutching the clean rag she had used to wipe down table 3. Her hands were damp. Her chest tight. She didn't cry. Tiana Brooks had learned long ago that tears were a language the world didn't bother to translate when it came from women who looked like her. The next morning, She received the call. HR, cold, efficient. After reviewing your recent conduct and feedback from the management team, we've decided to move forward without your continued employment at Bluestone Cellar. Effective immediately. What feedback? She asked, voice still calm. We're not at liberty to discuss internal reports, the voice replied. But it's been noted that certain behavior may not align with the image we aim to project. What behavior? Silence. Then, thank you for your time. Your final paycheck will be mailed to the address we have on file. The call ended. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, phone still in her hand, the tea beside her gone cold. On the wall was a framed photograph. She and her grandmother standing outside Taipei 101, 2 years ago, their arms wrapped tight around each other, faces pressed together, mid-laugh. Tiana reached out and touched the edge of the glass. And for the first time since the call, her hands stopped shaking. 3 days passed. She said nothing on social media. Didn't make a scene. Didn't even tell her closest friends, who would have undoubtedly staged a protest outside the restaurant that weekend. But someone else had noticed. Someone who had been sitting in the far right corner of the dining room on the day of the Mandarin phone call. Table 11. A quiet man in a charcoal blazer, laptop open, eyes half-lidded behind reading glasses. He hadn't been there for the food. He'd been there for her voice. Julian Chen was not just a tech billionaire. He was the architect behind Lingual Inc., the world's largest AI-powered language learning network, and a fierce advocate for multilingual literacy in underserved communities. He spoke 9 languages. And when he heard Tiana's Mandarin, he didn't just hear pronunciation. He heard fluency. Emotion. Family. So when she disappeared from the floor the next day, he asked questions. When no one would answer, he posted a single tweet. Question: why did a black waitress with perfect Mandarin vanish from at Bluestone Cellar 2 days after speaking to her grandma on shift? Second question: why was she never even promoted when she speaks 4 languages, has a Stanford degree, and a published paper on code switching? The tweet exploded. By midnight, the restaurant's Instagram page was in lockdown. Yelp was flooded. Screenshots of her supposed conduct were nowhere to be found. And Tiana? She finally opened her email. Sitting at the top of her inbox. Subject: Stanford Asian Language and Culture Series. From Office of the Vice Provost. Message: we'd love to invite you to speak on lived multilingualism and cultural bias in public-facing industries. Honorarium included. Let us know if you're available next month. She stared at the message. Then closed her eyes. They thought they'd silenced her with a termination form. But all they'd really done was amplify the voice they never bothered to understand. By Thursday, her name was trending. Not because she had spoken, but because the silence around her had become too loud to ignore. Hashtag Who Fired Tiana began as a quiet murmur among language teachers and linguists. Then came the activists, the polyglot communities, the underpaid service workers who had been dismissed for reasons as slippery as image and tone. And finally, the public joined in, not for politics, not even for justice, but out of disbelief. Because when the clip surfaced, the one that showed Tiana answering the call in soft, careful Mandarin, followed by the manager's quiet scoff, the smirk, the words. Bat chuak cho jong that lam. En hung o day, tue toi can nuoi that. Nobody could pretend it was about performance. Tiana didn't post it. She hadn't even known it existed. But someone at table 11 had recorded it. Not the billionaire this time, but a young marketing intern named Mel, who'd come in that day for a solo lunch and ended up filming because, in her words, something about it just felt off. The clip was 35 seconds long. No raised voices. No drama. Just a woman speaking to her grandmother. And a man deciding that voice didn't belong. It was the kind of discrimination so ordinary, so dressed up in professionalism, that it would have gone unnoticed if not for the language. The wrong language on the wrong tongue. By the end of the week, Bluestone Cellar had released a statement. Polished. Legal filtered. Sterile. We deeply regret any miscommunication that may have led to unintended consequences regarding a valued team member. Bluestone celebrates diversity in all its forms and maintains a strict anti-discrimination policy. No apology. No admission. No mention of her name. But they had made one mistake. They'd filed a trademark application the same day. Tiana only found out because an old professor from Stanford forwarded her the public record with a subject line that read, "Is this real, or are they out of their minds?" The application? Accent Lab, a pending brand concept under Bluestone Enterprises. Tagline. Bringing authentic global flavor to hospitality. The subtext? Her accent. Their brand. They weren't trying to erase her anymore. They were trying to own her. Tiana stood in front of the mirror the morning she saw the filing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She pulled her hair into a tight bun, clipped on the minimalist silver earrings her grandmother had mailed from Taipei, and slipped into a black blazer. Not for war. For witnessing. Because some battles aren't fought in court. Some are fought on stage, one word at a time. The invitation from Stanford was set for that afternoon. The panel was titled, Language, Bias, and the Illusion of Professionalism. It was meant to feature 3 speakers. But by the time Tiana stepped into the auditorium, they'd added a 4th chair. Because Julian Chen, the billionaire, had confirmed attendance at the last minute. He didn't speak first. She did. No slides. No notes. Just a single photo projected behind her, her grandmother standing in front of a noodle cart in Don Park, laughing. Tiana stepped to the mic and said, "They told me my accent was fake. That my voice didn't match their idea of who I was supposed to be. But I didn't learn Mandarin to impress guests. I learned it because my grandmother speaks it. I learned it in a home where 3 languages flowed across dinner, and none of them needed subtitles." She let the silence settle. They didn't just fire me. They tried to patent me. To turn my culture into a flavor profile. But accents aren't branding tools. They're survival. Their inheritance. Their home. The applause didn't come in a roar. It came in waves. Soft. Long-lasting. And when she stepped down, Julian Chen stood and shook her hand, not as a savior, but as someone who understood exactly what it meant to be both invisible and indispensable at the same time. 2 days later, Bluestone Enterprises withdrew the trademark application. But it wasn't enough. Because this wasn't about one restaurant, or one manager, or one hiring decision. It was about a system that had built entire marketing campaigns on the aesthetic of inclusion, while quietly cutting out the people who lived it. So Tiana built something else. Accent Archive. A platform. Not for resumes. For stories. For people with voices that didn't fit the brand, but shaped the world anyway. Within a month, 4,000 stories had been submitted. Voicemails. Audio clips. Bilingual lullabies. Code-switched slam poetry. Caribbean Creole wedding toasts. Somali English classroom speeches. Each one tagged with a simple header. Not fake. Not for sale. Because they didn't just try to rebrand her accent. They tried to reduce it. To flatten something generational into a menu item. And instead, they ended up giving it a microphone. Culture, they said, was the centerpiece of the new hospitality. It was in the decor, bamboo light fixtures, Balinese wall art, Moroccan tile floors. It was in the playlists, Afrobeats in brunch hours, lo-fi Japanese jazz at dinner. It was in the menu, too, where Vietnamese pho was shortened to beef noodle bowl. And where jollof rice had suddenly become West African spice pilaf. But never in the people. Not truly. Certainly not in the voices behind the counter, or the names on the employee schedules, or the accents that didn't match the dining room mood board. Tiana Brooks sat quietly at a reclaimed wood table in a newly opened concept restaurant called Natura and Bloom, 2 weeks after Bluestone had scrubbed their feeds clean of her name. She hadn't come for the food. She'd come to test something. The hostess greeted her in rehearsed cheer, then offered a card that read, "At Natura and Bloom, we believe in global fusion through thoughtful design. Our team is a mosaic of world perspectives." Tiana read the line twice. Then asked, in fluent French, if the hostess had any staff from Côte d'Ivoire. The hostess blinked. "I'm sorry." Tiana smiled. "Or perhaps Vietnam? Thailand? Colombia?" The girl hesitated. I think our head chef is from Oregon." By dessert, Tiana had counted 6 separate menu items labeled, inspired by heritage. Not one dish had a name from its actual country of origin. The servers wore uniforms stitched with flags of nations none of them had ever visited. And all of it, every square inch, was designed to look like inclusion, feel like equity, and smell just enough like Seoul or Lagos or Phnom Penh to justify the price point. This was curated culture. Stripped of language. Sanitized for consumption. 3 days later, the founders of Natura and Bloom released a partnership announcement, a limited edition merch drop titled "Language is Flavor." It featured hoodies that read "Bilingual is beautiful," chopsticks embossed with "resistance," and an apron with "Speak Your Truth" in 3 misaligned fonts. They posted it with a photo of 2 white executives standing in front of a rice paddy backdrop. Tiana didn't share it. She simply stitched it on her new platform, Accent Archive, with 3 words. "But never hired us." It went viral within hours. Because people had started paying attention. Not to the branding. To the people behind the branding. The former server who spoke Tagalog but was told to just smile silently at brunch. The Thai-American host who was written up for breaking tone when she corrected a customer's pronunciation of pad kra pao. The first-gen Nigerian chef who was asked to dial down the spice levels for Western palates. Stories poured into Accent Archive like confessions, not of sin, but of exhaustion. Of being celebrated as an idea, but excluded as a presence. So Tiana built something more. With help from Julian Chen and a group of cultural scholars, she began drafting a public registry. The Inclusion Integrity Index. A searchable database of hospitality brands, restaurants, hotels, and service chains, with verified reports of their internal hiring, promotion, and language equity practices. It didn't rate decor. It rated dignity. And for the first time, customers could ask not, "Where does the food come from?" but, "Did anyone in the kitchen ever get to name it?" At first, they tried to ignore her. Then they tried to co-opt her. A major lifestyle brand emailed her with an offer to collaborate on a cultural equity campaign. They wanted to feature her in a Voices of Flavor photo series, no control over the messaging, no equity share in the campaign, and no say in which brands her face would appear next to. Tiana declined. She didn't want her accent staged. She wanted her voice respected. It wasn't until Lumos, the country's largest hospitality consultancy, reached out that she realized the narrative was shifting. They didn't come with money. They came with metrics. "We've been running bias audits for years," the head of strategy told her, "but what you've built is emotional architecture. It makes people feel the data." He offered her a platform partnership, integrating Accent Archive into their client consultation process. Not to extract her voice. To amplify it. Tiana stood again on a stage, this time at the National Cultural Strategy Forum in D.C., flanked by designers, brand architects, and economists. She didn't tell them to stop designing culture. She told them to stop faking it. If your kitchen is 90% white, don't put a map of Hanoi on your wall. If you silence staff who speak Spanish, don't print bienvenidos on your menus. And if you build brands using our stories, but not our salaries, that's not inclusion. That's performance. She ended with a photo. Her grandmother again, this time in a grocery store aisle, holding up a jar of Asian fusion teriyaki curry butter. Underneath it, the caption read, "Culture isn't a flavor. It's a family recipe." The applause didn't just echo. It rippled. Because she wasn't speaking for applause. She was speaking for every tongue that had ever been trained to go quiet for someone else's comfort. Every server, barista, cook, and cashier who had ever code-switched their way into acceptability. She wasn't curating culture. She was correcting the catalog. It began with a question. One that no one at the tasting table expected. Tiana picked up the laminated proof of the new seasonal menu, tilted her head, and asked, "What dialect is this supposed to be?" The room fell silent. It was a menu design review at a well-funded fusion restaurant opening in downtown Los Angeles. Tiana had been invited as a consultant, part of a new initiative led by Lumos and the Accent Archive to ensure cultural fidelity in branding and language. On paper, she was there to offer light feedback. But now, everyone was looking at her as if she'd just asked who wrote the Bible. The head of branding cleared his throat. "You mean the Japanese?" Tiana pointed to the stylized kanji printed beside a dish called Kyoto Ember Chicken. "That character doesn't mean fire. It means convenience. And the stroke order's off. It looks like it was auto-filled by Google Translate." Someone across the table coughed. "Also," she said, flipping the page, "this line here is written in simplified Chinese, not traditional. Which would be fine if the dish wasn't labeled as Taiwanese street style. You can't mix scripts from two politically distinct regions and call it homage." A junior designer muttered, "I didn't think anyone would notice." Tiana looked at him, gently, not cruelly. "That's the problem, isn't it? Menus had always been mirrors. Not just of flavor, but of power. They didn't just tell diners what they'd eat. They told them whose stories were allowed to be served. And for years, stories like Tiana's had been reworded, shortened, or rewritten entirely. Growing up, her grandmother had taught her the meaning behind every dish, not just how it tasted, but how it was spoken. Not just the ingredients, but the syllables they lived in. She remembered her once asking, "Do you know why I never write the menu in English? Because people pronounce it wrong?" Tiana guessed. "No," her grandmother said. "Because in English, it's just food. In Mandarin, it's my life." The campaign Tiana launched next wasn't flashy. It didn't involve billboards or influencers. It was just a form. A quiet online submission tool added to the Accent Archive site titled "Menus That Miss the Point." Within a week, it had over 9,000 entries. A Korean dish labeled with the wrong hangul. A Filipino dessert described using Thai vocabulary. West African jollof described as rice with Caribbean heat. And worst, the story of a Vietnamese chef who had submitted his grandmother's bánh cot recipe, only to see it renamed Golden Crispy Rice Cups with a decorative lotus flower beside it. They hadn't just mistranslated. They had stripped. Tiana didn't just catalog them. She traced them. With a growing team of linguists, chefs, historians, and first-gen contributors, she began building a repository of culinary language, not for tourists, not for Yelp stars, but for correction. Not to shame brands, but to make sure next time, when someone called something heritage-inspired, they'd be asked, "Whose heritage? And did you ask them?" The pushback came quickly. Some chefs applauded the movement. But others, especially those whose menus had become design centerpieces, felt exposed. One high-end restaurateur emailed her directly. "You're taking this too far. We're not running language schools. It's just food." Tiana replied with a single line. "Then stop naming it like it's culture." But she wasn't just there to criticize. She offered alternatives. Workshops. Collaborative translation sessions. Consultation kits for emerging chefs with immigrant roots, many of whom had spent years hiding their native language to fit in with mainstream diners. She launched a pop-up series called No Translation Needed, where every dish was written exactly as its creator intended. No reductions. No approximations. One night, a guest read the word "egusi" on a hand-painted menu and asked what it meant. The chef, a soft-spoken Nigerian woman named Tolu, smiled. "I'll let the flavor explain." Tiana never made herself the center. She didn't stand in front of the camera. But at one dinner, a young girl from the audience approached her with a nervous smile and asked, "Is it true you speak 5 languages?" Tiana knelt beside her. "Only when I'm hungry." The girl laughed. "But how do you know which one to use?" Tiana thought for a second. "Whatever language they tried to take from me that day," she said. "That's the one I speak the loudest." Because menus, like people, aren't meant to be curated for comfort. They're meant to be read, respected, and remembered, in their original form. And if you can't pronounce it, ask. If you can't read it, learn. But if your first instinct is to rename it, then maybe you were never hungry for the story in the first place. It started like everything else in her life did, quietly. No headlines. No glossy campaigns. Just a line of code, a flicker of motion on a loading screen, and then a prompt. Welcome to VoicePrint. Where language isn't for sale. It's for keeping. Tiana Brooks hadn't meant to build a platform. She just wanted a place where people like her could stop apologizing for how they sounded. But somewhere between the menus no one could read, the accents rebranded out of resumes, and the quiet firings that came with tone, she realized something brutal. Language was only celebrated in this country when someone else could profit from it. VoicePrint wasn't an app. It was a declaration. Users logged in not to consume, but to contribute. Recordings of lullabies passed down through kitchen walls, audio clips of fathers teaching greetings from lost villages, barbershop debates in West African Pidgin, poetry in Haitian Creole, and even silence, yes, the pauses, because in some languages, a breath meant more than a sentence. Tiana didn't cure it. She catalogued. Not as a linguist, but as an archivist of resistance. And once again, the industry came knocking. This time, it was a tech giant. They called it a cross-cultural partnership opportunity. They offered funding, reach, exposure. And then came the slide deck. Polished. Focus grouped. We'd love to integrate VoicePrint into our AI voice assistant. Bring authenticity to pronunciation. Global nuance. Cultural richness. She paused at the mock-up. The homepage read. Powered by Accent Archive. But beneath it, in fine print, was a clause. All contributions become property of Vox Central Holdings Incorporated. She closed the deck. Didn't say a word. And didn't answer their follow-up call either. You see, they could license her story. They could steal her rhythm. They could even mimic her voice. But what they couldn't do, what they would never understand, was that Tiana didn't speak to be sold. She spoke to be remembered. 1 week later, VoicePrint went public, not for monetization, but for preservation. Tiana partnered with 3 university libraries and a coalition of indigenous archivists. She made every language file open access. Creators retained full rights. And for every company that wanted access, the rule was simple. Permission isn't implied. It's earned. She printed it on the homepage in all caps. Not as a warning. As a threshold. Meanwhile, Bluestone Cellar, the restaurant that had fired her, tried to re-enter the public's good graces. They released a new campaign. Posters that read, "Diversity on every plate." Commercials narrated in 6 languages, none of which they had spoken internally until their PR team told them to. And in the final frame of their flagship ad, they used a stock image. A black woman smiling while holding a tray. It wasn't Tiana. But it was supposed to be. Tiana saw it late one night, not because she was looking for it, but because someone from her archive texted, "They're at it again." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. By morning, the campaign had already been dragged. Not by her. By the very people Bluestone had ignored. Thousands of comments flooded in. "How many accents have you hired lately? This is what happens when you decorate with culture but don't live it. You fired her. We remember." Bluestone pulled the ad within 36 hours. But the damage wasn't just reputational. It was structural. People had learned to ask better questions. And the brands who couldn't answer? They faded. 6 months later, Tiana stood backstage at the Global Language Equity Conference in Nairobi, adjusting the lapel mic clip to her blazer. The audience was full. Academics. Linguists. Educators. Immigrants. A dozen voices in her ear, all murmuring in different tongues. When she took the stage, she didn't start with a speech. She played a recording. A 27-second clip. Her grandmother's voice, recorded the day before. When they ask what language you speak, don't just say English. Say every name that has ever held you. She let it echo through the hall. And then, in English, she said, "They tried to market our languages. But now we own the microphone." That day, VoicePrint surpassed 1 million entries. Not because it was profitable. Because it was real. Because it asked nothing of people but their truth, in their own rhythm, on their own terms. Because sometimes, power doesn't come with volume. It comes with vocabulary. Tiana Brooks was once told her Mandarin was fake. Now, she was invited to advise on United Nations linguistic equity policy. She had been fired without warning. Now, she was archiving dialects entire nations had forgotten how to preserve. She was once asked to dial it down. Now, she was helping an entire generation turn the volume back up. Because language isn't a performance. It's a fingerprint. A story. A resistance. And in the world they tried to curate, Tiana left them with the one sound they could never translate. Her silence, when she no longer needed their permission.